Language is crucial to understanding societies. It's crucial to recognising the ecological, social, political and economic conditions in which we live. We use language to frame problems, formulate solutions, to negotiate and communicate political and economic pitfalls. Language is interaction that can accelerate action. But language is also performance, and performances can be used to distract from inaction, to avoid action, or postpone action, as much as to accelerate it. And language is what we focus on in this second series of our Language and Power podcast. So we're talking today about some of the language around Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. Neither of us are experts in the geopolitical situation, but I think there are some interesting things to say about some of the language that we see around this and some of the things that we can perhaps learn from that. And we've got a few interesting clips to talk about. I think, should we go straight for it, Tom? And
this is an interesting situation, isn't it? We find quite often in critical discourse analysis that you don't necessarily have to take opinions or strong opinions about something. It's the language that we're interested in and the way other people use language. And it's often very difficult for analysts and students to talk about other people's languages and the attitudes, because they often sort of feel like they're implicated in these by presenting what other people seem to be saying through their discourse, and when it's not their own words. It's quite a tricky one. And I think you're right, it's important. We're not strategists. That's not our remit. We've got to sort of understand the context, but we are interested in the way people negotiate that context and some of the issues that come up, which won't necessarily reflect on any of our views to do with the invasion. But they're already, by saying invasion, you see, smuggled in an evaluation that. It's tricky, isn't it? But so some of these issues come up, as you say. So do you want me to play the clip now?
Yeah, let's go.
So the following is a TikTok broadcast that I picked up on Facebook, seems to have been shared by a lot of people, and I shall play it for you now.
There's a lot of people on TV didn't expect a war like this to happen in, let's say, certain neighborhoods.
This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
These are prosperous middle-class people. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
What could be a difference here from other conflicts, that could seem very far away, in Africa or Middle East or whatever. I mean, these are Europeans that we're seeing being killed.
This isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
Wow. That was you choosing your words carefully? That was the careful version? So what were you going to say if you weren't choosing your words carefully? I just hope the next time this happens, it happens back in the Middle East where it belongs. Here's the thing, people. Here's the thing. Beyond the racism, right? Like, let's forget the racism. Oh, how I wish we could forget about the racism. You do realize that until very recently, fighting crazy wars was Europe's thing. That was Europe's entire thing. That's all of European history. They even had something called the 100 Years' War. You understand how long that is? That's like a decade. They got a Nobel Prize because they stopped fighting. Imagine that. Now people are going to be like, oh, to see this in Europe, to see this. Like, I'll tell you now, I don't know about you, but I was shocked to see how many reporters around the world, by the way, seem to think that it's more of a tragedy when white people have to flee their countries. Because I guess what? The darkies were built for it? I mean, you see how they run in the Olympics, Peter. Clearly, God has given them this talent for a reason. I totally agree. I mean, even if this wasn't a war, these people would probably be fleeing their homes for fun. It's just who they are. Back to you guys in the studio.
Yeah, I think worth pointing out, just because you are listening in black and white, as it were, I mean, it's worth pointing out that at the end, the presenter was doing a little spoof parody as if he was a reporter at the end. These weren't real voices, but the other voices in the middle very much were from CNN and Al Jazeera and other places. Really interesting. I thought that was a brilliant clip, Michael. What about you?
Yeah, he puts his finger on something that I think watching the coverage, you notice this very different treatment in the reporting of this particular situation than you get in others. And he's just, I mean, he's done our job. He's collected those clips together and he puts his finger on it. You know, he says what it is. You know, is that you being careful in your language? What would it have been if you weren't being? What was the non-careful version? That's a commentary on the language, isn't it? And I think it's an amazing clip.
No, it is. I would agree. I think there's been quite a bit of difficult. I'm choosing my words carefully here, talking about folk CDAs. We use the word folk here to mean non-professionals. It's not meant in a derogatory way. It means that other people have been in a lot of analysis of language. I think actually that's one of the amazing things of social media. We do see a lot of people analyzing what other people have said in pretty sophisticated ways, normally with a lot of humor, where they sort of reduce it to the absurd to bring out what was being said against what could have been said, either for better or worse in this case. But it's been great for that, for people analyzing coverage.
Yeah, and this is something that we just listening to the radio and TV and watching the TV coverage, we in our house noticed this. It's very noticeable, this tendency for some reporters to really emphasize the European nature of this and heighten the sense that it's then therefore exceptional. And again, the presenter on that clip really puts his finger on it. You know, that the history of Europe is one of war and conflict, and so it's not really historically an exception. It's pretty much
that's what we were taught in history, wasn't it? It was this war, that war, this person against.
Yeah.
It's what we do.
Yeah. So really, really good.
Really good.
Yeah.
I think that we had some. Well, maybe when we were chatting about this before, there's different things they're talking about, and you mentioned the word empathy and stuff like that. I think there's some interesting stuff there in that, because it's nearer physically to you, it does make you feel more frightened. And you know what? We have to. I would much rather a war happen somewhere else than near my family as well. That's just human nature. It's not great. But then you were talking about the empathy, and there's the difference between maybe the fear factor of it being near you.
Yeah.
And the empathy for other people, which I think you were interested in.
That's right. So it does make you think. I mean, what we're wondering here is how do we give a CDA discourse analysis linguistic take on some of that reporting that was included in that clip. And as you say, if something terrible is happening close to you, you are going to feel fear. As you say, perfectly understandable. What we've got here are reporters not emphasizing the proximity to potential viewers. So they're not saying, imagine having this war and it's so close, it's only X number of kilometers or X number of miles or hours, away. They're not emphasizing the proximity at all, which is something that you would imagine for almost anybody. If there's something close by, then it's a fear-inducing kind of situation. But some of those reporters were American reporters, so it was very far away. So the proximity issue is not the thing that's being spoken about here. What is being spoken about is something else. And what we were saying here is about empathy for when I'm watching the coverage of this news, or any news of war. For me, whoever is involved in a war situation, I feel empathy for, and I wish they weren't having to experience that situation. But in these reports, they are trying to emphasize the fact that this is Europe and these are Europeans, and not, I think one of them said, and not Africa, not in North Africa, So it's I care about people, whether they're from Africa or, down the street. I don't want people to be harmed in this sort of way. So the question is, why are they emphasizing that sort of aspect of it?
It reminds me when I was seeing that clip and thinking about today's podcast, about a colleague of mine, Harriet Lloyd, who was looking at the BBC Children in Need broadcasts and looking at how empathy was created in order to maximize donations. And it's interesting, we did some work together on that in a nursing environment, but Harriet came up with a sort of a three-way distinction. He talks about social closeness and distance, and that's the extent to which you come in touch with each other. Experiential closeness and distance is the degree to which characteristics such as gender, ethnicity, or nationality are shared and experienced by individuals and groups. And then the third one is called actional distance, and that's the extent to which we feel we can actually help the people involved. And I think it's a really interesting way of looking at that, because you can see that in emphasizing these are people like us in ethnicity, but etc., by human nature, unfortunately, in our genes, we tend to react more favorably to people like us, something we've got to try and overcome culturally, but unfortunately, it's true. And so you can see how that might increase the empathy. But from a different perspective, you maybe thinking more positively about it. Okay, so it's quite easy to do with the people in Ukraine. Why are they not, when reporting on other conflicts in other places, they can be doing the same thing to increase the empathy and the closeness and the relational closeness, experiential closeness with these other groups, instead of exactly the cliches these guys fall back on. They're not blue-eyed blondes, which is what one of them mentions. I think that's brought up in the Guardian article. They're blonde and blue-eyed was brought up. I'm neither. But also, that they're reverting to these very typical features and perpetuating the myths that create lack of empathy. And instead of, it's natural that we empathize with people like us, but therefore the job of the news surely is to create those empathies, work on it strategically to create empathies with groups who are less obviously like us in the superficial ways. And instead of doing that, they've just pulled out all the old cliches here.
Yeah. I mean, if there are tendencies like that, then you're, we've got the intelligence, hopefully, to recognize any prejudices that we might have or people might have, and try and work against those. We don't have to be slaves to taught prejudices or learn prejudices or whatever. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? And so and that, I like that kind of schema that you've just given there. I think that is a useful way of trying to understand, why are we seeing this? So I was wondering if we could think about this in terms of implicature. So there's this idea in language analysis of implicature, where you say things, and sometimes you don't say things in exactly the most straightforward way in order to imply something else. And so this kind of comes back to for people who don't know, Grice is the person who kind of is famous for coming up with this idea. And the principle in that, I mean, it's mostly, as far as I recall, talking about conversations. But if we think about reporting as a kind of pseudo conversation, more of a one-sided conversation where the reporter is telling us something, maybe we can think about conversation in that way. But if a conversation has a principle where you want to cooperate with the person that you're speaking with or communicating with, and when you don't cooperate with them, that's for a reason. So it's not saying that you always have to cooperate. It's not a rule. It's generally the principle is that you cooperate, and when you don't cooperate, you are doing so for a reason, often to imply something else. There are maxims, conversational maxims of quantity, where it's understood that you will give the information that is required and not give more information than is required. Yeah. A maxim of quality, in which you don't say anything that you believe to be false or that you don't have evidence for. A maxim of relation, in which you are understood to be giving relevant information. And a maxim of manner, in which you are going to be orderly, brief, non-ambiguous, and so on. And those are maxims, those are the kind of understood underlying kind of norms of a conversation. And you can go against those maxims. So if I start telling you something and I'm giving you far more information than would be required, and I'm doing it in a kind of way that's obvious that I'm doing this, I'm implying something else.
Yeah.
I'm trying to make a joke. I'm trying to be ironic. I'm trying to, I don't know, all sorts of other kind of.
What's a nice one they always give is if you say, "Can you answer the door? I'm in the bath."
Yeah.
But we automatically assume, well, that has to be relevant information to be cooperative. Therefore, it means no, I can't answer the door because I'm not
Yes.
going.
Yeah. So you're implying you're breaking a maximum of relevance there, and therefore implying something else. Now, I was wondering about this one. Where does this all come back to this? When they start talking about the people being victims here, these are Europeans. The people are being shot here are Europeans. I see that as information to me. It is largely irrelevant. The fact that they're being shot at and being pushed out of their homes, that their nation is being invaded, that's relevant information to me. Or this is how I'm taking it. And so I was looking at this and thinking, well, I wonder if this is a kind of an example of implicature where one of those maxims is being broken because they're giving me irrelevant information. If we think about these maxims as being the basic unspoken rules of conversations, you can flout them. So if you flout these rules, you're doing so on purpose in order to imply something else.
Which you expect the speaker to take up. It's cooperative, yeah.
So in a cooperative way. Another option is to violate them, in which you break these maxims on purpose, but you're hoping that the other person doesn't notice. And we see that a lot in political discourse. Especially
the example I gave you earlier, I hope no one's listening before the watershed, was Bill Clinton saying, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman," where he was expecting you to take the implicature that he did not have any type of sex with her, but he was using his own definition of sexual relations and hoping to get away with it.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. And then you can also, there's this other way you can infringe these maxims where you're not meeting the maxims, but you're not doing it intentionally. So, if you're in a heightened emotional state, you might start repeating something over and over. So you're breaking the maxim of manner by repeating yourself, but you're doing it because of your emotional state. You're not intending to do that. You're not trying to deceive anybody. It's just some other reason. But I don't, and then there's a fourth option, which is you just opt out of these maxims altogether, completely. But I don't think the reporters are intending. So I'm reading it as there being an implication behind them giving me this, what I see as irrelevant information. But I don't think it quite works, because I don't think they're intending to deceive. They're not intending to imply something that I'm taking up, and I don't even think that they're doing it. I don't know if they're violating this. What's your take?
No, I think it's really interesting, because then if you say, well, what's the implicature you're getting? As a sympathetic, empathetic, liberal guy, and they might be horrified if you say to them, this is the implicature, that they're generating.
Yeah.
But then you ask them, well, what made you say it then? So maybe subconsciously, underlying, that it does tell us something about the reporting. And I think, like all the things with CDA, I find, you can't really analyze single examples. But if you see it again and again and again, it's not an accident anymore. And I think that was the point of the TikTok thing, wasn't it? That I agree with you totally. They're not trying to generate an implicature, and they'd be horrified at the implicature being generated. But then, so what are they doing? Why are they giving us this redundant information and therefore going against the maxim of quantity, I suppose, or relevance? In some way, what does it say about their underlying system that makes them say such things? Really a good way of interrogating it, isn't it? And getting in and working out what the text is doing. And I think from a CDA point of view, in some ways, it doesn't sometimes matter if it's intentional or not.
Yeah.
This is the whole question about, in structural racism.
Yeah.
People say we're not racist because we don't mean it. But the idea is, well, but the institutions are structurally so intention's almost irrelevant when you're on the receiving end.
I think yes, I think that's right. So thinking about the implicature, it maybe is taking us down a route that it is not the best one to be critical of. I mean, it's a starting point, but you're absolutely right. I completely agree that the intention is sort of a side issue from the point of view of the fact that, as the commentator on the clip said, you've got this racist language. coming out in this report after report after report. And I think the clearest example of that was it's happening in a place that you hope it's not going to happen. I guess the implication there that there are places that you do hope it's going to happen, which is again,
if it's going to happen, it's going to happen somewhere else. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Which is, again, I mean, you would hope that the reporter who said that would be, is not saying that he hopes wars happen.
It's useful to look at it in the views of pragmatics to see, well, this is an implication here, whether you meant it or not.
Yes, yeah.
And then that's still, I think it's a really good route to get in, but then to take it a bit further and what's it doing there?
Yeah. And from any point of view, adding this information in is therefore seen as something that's significant to this situation. For these reporters, is that you've got this conflict happening with people who are white and who are, as you said in the Guardian, one item that the Guardian reported was that, even referring to people's colour of people's eyes. So
I know that blue-eyed blonde was really shocking. I mean, almost some of the others zipped past me, but that we're all meant to say, what did he say there?
Yeah. I mean, should we read that one, because that's a quote from somebody, isn't it?
So this is from the Guardian of the 2nd of March by Mustafa Bayoumi, and it's called "They Are Civilized and Look Like Us: The Racist Coverage of Ukraine." And the one that he mentioned particularly is this: the BBC interviewed a former Deputy Prosecutor General of Ukraine who told the network, "It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed every day." The journalist goes on, rather than question or challenge the comment, the BBC host flatly replied, "I understand and respect that emotion." Wow. And let's finish the paragraph. On France's BFM TV, journalist Philippe Courbet stated this about Ukraine: "We're not talking here about Syrians fleeing the bombing of the Syrian regime backed by Putin. We're talking about Europeans leaving in cars that look like ours to save their lives." And I think we've got some empathy thing and closeness thing, but in doing that, there's this deep inherent race. Let's not call it racism, because that implies a fault of the person, but racist ideologies embedded in there, deliberately or not. And that that blonde-haired, blue-eyed example is quite chilling historically as well.
Yeah.
We're talking about this idea of generating implicatures, but also cultural difference. I mean, the whole idea of, unfortunately, to be an in-group, you've got to have an out-group. And so therefore, to empathize with Ukrainians, you've got to compare them with some. This is the ways you can do it more or less suitably, strategically. But it's one of the things that happens. And so this idea of othering people. And I saw a really good little clip on Facebook page I somehow stumbled into and have become a member of. But it said, "Can we start referring to American billionaires as oligarchs?"
Yeah, I saw that too.
This is the classic freedom fighter one. Freedom fighter terrorists the other way. Why are Russian billionaires oligarchs but American billionaires not oligarchs? What is the extra meaning? Why is this violation of quantity there? What's the extra load of oligarch that's implying that, what is it, that billionaires are controlling the state in Russia, but they're not in the US? You are kidding me. And so it was actually an American Democrat website, but I thought that was really nice. And we hear it again and again, the oligarchs. They've had their yachts taken away from them. Great symbols of idle wealth is the yacht, but no, you never hear about American oligarchs. You do hear about American billionaires, but it doesn't carry the same extra implicature, does it?
No, it's an achievement, isn't it? It's an achievement rather than a cruel occupation.
Yes, that's right. If he's that rich, he must have earned it, as someone once said to me.
No, that's and so a very huge disparity there. So, and I think again that's another example around the reporting and discussion of this situation, this war in Ukraine, in which people are really, really taking hold of the differences in the use of language and the kind of problematic use of language from many points of view. One of the things that I think is fascinating here, going back to what you said about the racist ideology of some of the people who are being quoted in these reports and then not being challenged, and some of the reporters who are themselves using racist discourse to describe the situation, is that you've got this, there's almost as though there's a resource that they fall into, they use that kind of uses these tropes, and wherever they got them from, that they exist, they're readily available, and they're almost the easiest for them to grasp. Where do we go from here? Oh, we can get that one. It's almost as though it's the first thing that they can think of to quickly report the story in terms that they feel will be, newsworthy. So there's the sort of racism in the discourse that's available. If there are different discourses available, the one that's readily available is the one. It appears to be one that's this kind of totally.
Yeah,
racist.
I think Fairclough talks about members' resources. If you belong to a community, these are the standard ideas that are out there, and we might think we're immune to them, but they will come to our mind automatically because we hear them so often.
Yeah.
But they will come to our mind automatically because we hear them so often, and we're just maybe likely to repeat them next time because it's the easiest thing to do, and we think we're immune. But and this is part of the point of CDA is, people think they're immune and they don't do these things. Those are the stories we go to, those are the ideas we go to, and we might have to make an effort and we might be able to come back, but it's just the easiest thing. And we've all seen ourselves doing it in the pub or somewhere else where we're taking part in a conversation. We're not entirely sure where we're saying what we really want to think we think, because it's just the easy to fall back on these tropes, and they get reproduced and they do enter your brain.
Yeah, and then the point then is that as we said earlier, if they do, then you can take two routes. You can say, well, that's just the way things are, so I'll continue with this line of thought, or you can recognize it for being one that's not a good way of thinking and seeing the world, that it is problematic, and try and do what you can to stop yourself and others from thinking that. So I think that's important to say. But I was going to say, from the reporters, you've got, I think that is a really good point about those members' resources and what's available, and that's what's available, and how they understand, or how they just are quickly given to understand the take on the situation, in this case in Ukraine. But there's another side to this, which is what they think their audience is, and they by saying it in this way, they think that their audience is white, European, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and in many cases that might be true. A lot of their audience will be for some of these, but many of them won't be falling into those categories either. So you've got a kind of double racism ideologically coming in. It's how you understand the people you're reporting about, and it's how you understand the people you're talking to.
No, just when you say that, recalls to mind when my wife was doing field work in the indigenous areas in the south of Mexico, in the highlands of Chiapas, and we went to visit the local surgeries, local small hospitals, and we were talking about the treatment of indigenous women in particular, and contraception. But exactly what you're talking about happened. These white or mestizo doctors started telling us the most incredible things, and we're thinking, just keep talking, because we've got this on the tape recorder, but the most racist things, because they were just automatically assuming that as middle class, white, educated folk, we were going to share these. It was like, it's like the taxi driver effect multiplied a million. It's quite astounding. But you're right, it's this double racism against both the people they're complaining about, or insulting, but also to assume that you are automatically part of that same polarized community. So that, I see that the fact that the newscasters are doing that. What does it make of us? What's the subject position they're attributing to us, to throw in some more Faircloughian formal language?
It's amazing, and I guess I don't know. I don't know what else to say about this. It's
well, it was made again. Sorry, but it's almost we haven't actually got all this stuff prepared properly today, but we're leading into each other's ideas, which is lovely, because you're talking about those audiences. There's another nice piece of, well, I won't call it folk CDA because it's by a journalist, and so this is half their job, but it's again from the Guardian, but it's called Ukraine Crisis: What Message Was Biden Sending to Putin? And actually it talks about the fact that he had to address 4 different audiences at once: the Ukrainian people, Putin himself, Europe, and to the American people. Now, obviously, straight away, where these are categories and they're reifications anyway. But it's quite a nice piece of analysis because we've talked about this idea before, and the idea that there's all sorts of different people there. Not everyone's got the same liberal empathy as you towards other people's suffering. And we've got to address multiple audiences in multiple ways of speaking. And this is quite a nice analysis because it's talking about how President Biden in his State of the Union address had to cover these 4 different angles in his speech to look competent, threatening, empathetic to all these different audiences in a way without alienating them. So it's an article that's probably worth chasing up on. Really interesting from that point of view. There was one more just very quickly because I'm hogging the floor here, which I'm sure is breaking some Gricean maxim. One I was just interested in because it's an article that someone sent with an alternative point of view, a talk that's going on about someone saying, look, here's an alternative way to look at the crisis. And it's very interesting. It's actually from September 2015 in the annexation of the Crimea, I think, etc. But it's by a professor from John Mearsheimer, Distinguished Service Professor in Political Science at the University of Chicago. And it's called officially The Causes and Consequences of the Ukraine Crisis, talking about that first Ukraine crisis. Causes, plural, consequences, plural. However, the subtitle it is, Why is Ukraine the West's fault? That's not causes and consequences. That is one, it's taking down a hugely, I think it's what you're saying about, what you said earlier linked into this, that we try and find one simple way to understand it, like the blue-eyed blondes or something like that. And people just are scared of complexity. So even this distinguished professor, instead of causes and consequences, multiple consequences become one consequence. Then that gets associated with fault and blame. And those things are not necessarily associated at all. It's just a very easy way of taking a really complicated situation. Okay, I'm going to say it's the US's fault. I'm going to say it's Putin's fault. Instead of saying it's really complicated mess. And we don't just need to take up sides and do this, this virtue signaling or position wherever we do it. It always just narrows down to a very simple answer. It's almost posturing as well. I mean, I hate to be rude to the distinguished professor, but I sort of think you're much more interested in standing there having this position and looking different and radical than actually trying to solve the problem here. And that's a huge problem as well. And it's one we all sort of fall into.
Yeah, it's something that you see again and again, isn't it? Simplification is a particularly in public discourse, which is about geopolitics. It is very, very often reduced to simple, sometimes binaries, maybe sometimes simple triads of ingredients that have made the situation occur.
Triads pushing it. That's really pushing us to our limits, isn't it? Daytime TV.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's like those chat show hosts, or even on the supposedly highbrow ones. Can you give me a yes or no, please? Well, no, actually, I can't, or because it's not that simple. But you just want a 30-second soundbite to boost your ratings.
Yeah. I was listening to an interesting podcast the other day about.
There are other podcasts
Ukraine.
available.
Yeah. There's a guy called Tiernan Duyeb, who is a British comedian, and he has a podcast called The Partly Political Broadcast, and he was interviewing somebody about Ukraine and the historical factors that apparently are at work here. Yeah, go back a long way. So and it was, I think, I'll put a link for people who are interested in that to that podcast. But it's, you get some sense for us who don't know about these things, including myself in that. Yes, it gives you a sense at least of those complex causes, which apparently.
But I'm guessing it's longer than 2 minutes.
Oh, yeah, it's about an hour.
That's the problem, isn't it? We've got
it's
effort to do this.
Yeah.
We once prefer someone with capital, with political capital, to sum it all up for us and give us an opinion we can repeat without having to listen and think for 2 hours. Unfortunately.
Yeah. But then going back to the topic that we began with, even if you do, even if news reports do require, and they do require simplification. You can't, in a news report, spend an hour explaining the situation to an audience. They've got a couple of minutes, but even then, you've got a choice. you know, if you find yourself saying things that are from a racist place, like we heard in those clips, you can simplify those things in a different way, you know, in a way that is not racist. You know, simplification does not equal racist.
That's a really good point.
And that's where we kind of...
You can't put a quart into a pint pot, to use a very British metaphor. You know, it is a news program. It's got to be covered in so many seconds. So you've got to work with those constraints and affordances, but you can do it in original ways. But it's no good trying to suggest something that just doesn't fit there, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you know, I always find it a kind of useful simplification is just to talk about humanity and humans. You know, you don't have to talk about people's skin unless that's relevant. You know, that's, you know, and of course there is racism. So in those situations where you're talking about racism, then it's apposite to talk about people's skin color or ethnicity or whatever is being kind of brought into.
And generating implicatures.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I mean, this could be good training for journalists, though, when you're saying stuff. Look, you've only got 2 minutes, but just make sure you don't generate a whole, you know, centuries worth of implicatures in there.
Yeah. So, you know, human beings are being, you know, their country's been invaded. They're human beings, and there's the tragedy. It's not no more or less tragic because of what they look like. So
really interesting.
Well, let's draw the episode to a close. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week on a different topic. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.